Just quickly intro the series that we're doing. If you notice on the front of your bulletin, it says if there's one thing I could tell you or let you know about, I don't have the title, it's a long title, so I don't have it memorized, it would be. And so this morning, during this month, you're going to have a little bit of variety, and you're going to hear some things that hopefully will stick, just like super glue to your heart, to your mind. Some very, very important lessons that some of us have learned that we're going, hey, if you could just learn this, learn this. And so Pastor Greg's actually kicking us off today. Let's give him a good Westtown welcome.
All right, so start by saying that I came across this. I used to be on Facebook, and some of you probably noticed I was on there a lot. And if you are a person who's on there a lot, you probably noticed I'm not on there at all anymore, and probably glad, because if you can turn on your app or whatever and you started scrolling, you're like, there's Greg again, there's Greg again, there's Greg again. I didn't mean to do it. I was just like somebody's stuff, and I'd show up. So, but you know how to block me anyway, so that's okay too. I came across this on a Facebook one time, and so you may have seen this, but these are silly why questions. Have y'all seen the silly why questions? Here's one. Why do drugstores make sick people walk all the way to the back to get their prescriptions filled, but they'll let you buy cigarettes at the front? This one's for Rod. Why do people order a Diet Coke with their double cheeseburger and large fries? This one's for me. Why do people leave their cars worth thousands of dollars in the driveway and put useless junk in the garage? Now, this is for all of us, because we've probably all asked this question. Why are hot dogs sold in packages of 10, but buns are sold in packages of 8? I think you can get a pack of 10 these days. Let's see. Now, this one really confuses me. Why do the drive-up ATM machines have Braille lettering on them? I mean, does a blind person is going to drive up there, and how are they going to get to the right? And if they do, I mean, I guess they have to feel the whole thing, but I'm thinking if I'm watching somebody feeling for Braille, and I'm going to go the other direction as far as driving goes. And there's a good one. This one's true, too. Why is it they make lemon juice with artificial flavoring, but liquid soap actually has lemons in it? Go figure. This one's for Tom. Why is the man who invests all your money called a broker? Why is the slowest time of the day on the road called rush hour? And here's another one. It just confounds me. Why do they sterilize the needle before they do a lethal injection? I don't know. Or this one. Why don't they make the entire airplane out of the same stuff they make that black box out of that you cannot destroy? And here's one along the same lines: is if flying is so safe, then why do they call the airport the terminal? Pastor Rod asked me to speak a few weeks back, and the way I understood what he wanted me to talk about, because I'll hear what somebody says, and my memory's not like superb, so I'll just hear it, I'll process it, how I understand it, and then kind of categorize it. What I heard him say, and I think this is at least close anyway, was something like this. Talk about whatever it is that you would talk about if you only had one opportunity to tell somebody what you want to tell them. He's shaking his head, so I did get it. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. And so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to ask some questions, but they're going to be not so silly questions. These are going to be some thought-provoking questions. And I know I said just one thing that I'm going to talk about, but if any of you all are familiar with the old Columbo detective series, who remembers that? Anybody remember that? I'm going to be like Columbo, okay? Just as you think I'm finished asking that question, I'm going to walk away like he's done. Oh, just one more thing. So my one more thing is going to be several one more things to get to the big one more thing that we want to talk about. Just one thing that I'm going to talk about. So what is the one thing that I would like to talk about today? The most important thing, I think, is what is God's plan? What is God's plan for our lives? 1990, a book came out called God's Plan for Man. It had to be good because it was written by a guy named Finis Jennings Dake. With a name like that, how could it not be, a really impressive book? That's an impressive name. Even more impressive is that for all of time, the books have been recorded where you cannot plagiarize someone else's title. Nobody had taken that title yet. Isn't that amazing? Here it was, 1990, and the guy does a book. It's called God's Plan for Man, and nobody beat him to it. This is the size of the book, God's Plan for Man. It's over 1,000 pages. This is another God's plan for man. It's called the Bible. Maybe that's why somebody didn't use, or nobody used the title God's Plan for Man before 1990, is because the book had already been written. There's nothing against taking advantage of some insights, which is what this guy did. He had sermons and exposition of passages and that sort of thing to be helpful, to help us understand. And that's okay. I'm going to talk about some things this morning that kind of go in that direction. I'm going to try not to get too heady, because what I want to do is to keep it simple as much as I can. There's a little bit of a glare. Let me see if I can get this where, there we go, it's a little better. All right, so we have these two things. We have God's plan for man as explained to us by Dr. Dake, and we have God's plan for man as explained to us by countless authors, 66 books, all in. This is probably a better representation compared to the other one, because this is more like the size of lettering. The other one I showed you is so little I can't even read it. But God's plan for man is not complicated. It's not complicated. When God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave us his plan for his people. It was called the 10 Commandments. 10 simple commands God gave. You can find them in Exodus 20. You can find them in Deuteronomy 5. They're these. Only worship Yahweh, the one true God. Number 2, don't commit idolatry. In other words, don't worship any other gods. Another one, the third one, do not misuse God's name. I thought about that when somebody titled their book, God's Plan for Man, but I probably shouldn't go there. We have to be careful, don't we, to attribute things to God when they might not be exactly 100% accurate. Number 4, set aside a day for rest and for worship. In the Old Testament, they called that the Sabbath. We call it the Lord's Day. It was Saturday back in the day. It's Sunday for us, unless you're a Seventh-day Adventist. Or some Catholics, I think, do the Saturday thing. That's all right. The important thing is that we set aside the day for worship and for rest. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Notice it didn't say you actually have to like them. I hope my kids like me. But it didn't say you have to like them. It did say you have to honor them. You hear that, Jonathan? Are you in here? Okay, I just want to make sure. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. And this would include any type of sexual immorality. Okay, it specifically was dealing with adultery then, but it would incorporate all of that. Do not steal. Don't tell lies about other people. And do not envy what someone else has that you don't have. So those are the 10. Now, the reason God gave the 10 commandments to God's people is because this is God's plan for how we live in relationship with God and how we live in relationship with other people. And so if we would just follow these 10 commands, things would go pretty well for us, if you think about it. And it's not really that complicated. And so what happened is, over time, these 10 commandments, they kept adding on more and more and more and more and more. What they were doing was, they were like, okay, there's this little circle here. God wants you to stay inside these boundaries, right? And there's a pretty big circle. But they got kind of smart, and they figured, well, if we make it so that we'll put those boundaries far enough in that we won't even get close to the real boundary, then that'll make us really safe. But the problem was, it created an atmosphere where people were encumbered, really, by trying to follow God's laws, and they were missing the intent of the laws of God, which were to facilitate that relationship with God and with other people, to live in a kind of relational dynamic with God and with other people that is God's plan for us. And so it went from being 10 commandments to 613. That's a lot. That's a big difference. So it's no wonder when Jesus came, he said, you can sum all of those up in 2 commands, which is to love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He simplified it. And if you think about it, those first 4 have to do with our relationship with God. The next 6 have to do with our relationship with other people. If we really love God, then we're gonna worship just God, not any other gods. And we're not going to have idols in our lives because we love God. We're going to keep the Sabbath because we want to honor God, set aside that time for worship and reflection. And we definitely don't want to go around and say things in the name of God that really don't represent God. And so we have to really be careful. But if we love God, we're going to follow those 4 commands. If we love other people, then we're going to do the other 6. If we love our mom and dad, then we're going to honor them, even if we don't like them. We're not going to kill other people. We're not going to have sexual immorality in our lives and affect others in negative ways and ourselves because of it. We're not going to steal. We're not going to lie. And we're just going to worry about ourselves and not worry about what other people have. And so by loving God, other people the way that we would also like to be loved in return, we will do the things these 6 commandments tell us. And so Jesus took the 10, which had been expanded to 613, and reduced it back to 2. That's pretty good math. I like Jesus' formula a lot better. It became overwhelming. It reminds me of one Christmas break when I was in college. I worked on a construction site, and we were doing a framing of a house in Hilton Head. And the guy was nice enough just to give me a 2-week job, friend of the family, who was a contractor. And my job, because they already had the people who were nailing the boards and all of that stuff, my job was just to tote boards to where the folks needed them to nail them up. And so they bought these boards in large quantities. I think now they probably have them already pre-cut and stuff, but back then you cut your own boards to the size you needed them. There's a guy whose sole responsibility, mine was to tote the boards. There's another guy whose sole responsibility was to cut the boards to the specified length that they needed. Well, there are a lot of 8-foot 2x4s that are put up during construction. All right, and so tons and tons of 2x4x8s were being cut. And one time when the cutting guy was taking a break, I went over and started to take one of the boards they needed, and it was the only 2x4 left. And he stopped me and said, "Don't take that board." I said, "Well, they need it over here." He said, "Don't take it. That's my pattern." I said, "Well, you could just measure another one." He said, "No, you don't understand." He said, "If you take that board and I measure another one, and I give you that board that I just cut, now I take the board that I just cut, and I measure my next board by it, and you take that one, I cut that one. I measure the following board by the one I just cut, and you take that one, and so on and so forth. Every board I cut is going to add a pencil length to it. By the time you're done with the construction of the house, it's out of square, it's not level, and so it's hard to get it right. So you got to stick to the basic pattern to get it right. They expanded on it, and they were missing the intent of the law. I know some of this stuff you guys have heard me talk about before, but Rod said talk about something you really felt was important. God's plan is important. Some of these things are going to be sort of repetitious. And so that first part, the relationship with God, loving God, having communion with God, really is what it boils down to. Why is that important? Why is having communion with God important? The first reason is because it gives God glory. Now, does God deserve glory? Well, I would think that since God is God and God created everything that exists, that is material that we know, then it would make sense that we would give God the honor and the respect that he deserves as our creator. We wouldn't exist without him, so it kind of stands to reason that we would give honor to God. So having communion with God glorifies God. God is God, and God deserves our respect. God created us. God loves us. The reason he gave us the law is because he does love us. He wants what's best for us. He gave us boundaries to live within, and so that we could experience life in its fullness by following his plan for our lives. When we venture outside of his plan for our lives, bad things start happening, and we have to kind of clean up bad messes because of it. Ultimately, having communion with God, loving God, is good for us. We are the benefactors of loving our Creator. It's good for us. That's why we have communion with God. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows his handiwork. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they display knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion like a champion, rejoicing to run his race. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat." At this point, the writer gets ADD. Because his next statement is, "The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul." Okay, so he's talking about the heavens and the awesome wonder of display of the glory of God in God's creation, and the stars and the firmament and the sun, everything that you see in nature. And it so wows him. It's so impressed. And all of a sudden, the law of the Lord is perfect. Where did that come from? Then he says, "The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous. They are more precious than gold, than pure gold. They are even sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them," get this, "is your servant warned, and in keeping them there is great reward." Now, if you think about that, I was reading through this passage, and I shared this with the men's breakfast one time. I got to thinking, why is he talking about this stuff, about all of the creation stuff? And then all of a sudden he says, "The law of the Lord is perfect." What does one have to do with the other? I think this is it. When we think about creation, everything is perfectly ordered, isn't it? The gravitational pull of everything, the way that the moon goes around the earth, the way the earth rotates, the way the earth revolves around the sun, the way the other planets revolve. It all has rhyme and reason and order. It all makes sense. In the same way, God has established the physical laws that we live within. We can count on those things. We know that if we stand in front of a locomotive coming at full force, 65 miles an hour, we will not survive. We know that if we step off a 25-story building, we're going to go to the ground and we're not going to survive, probably. The laws of physics we can count on. That's how they can send men to the moon in these spacecrafts, and they can put them on, they can land them there, and they can get them back to the earth. And then when things go wrong, they can do calculations that use the natural forces of God's creation to sling the spacecraft back to the earth like they did with the Apollo 13 mission. Because they could count on these things. They're always going to be there. They're always going to be right. They're always going to be the same, and you can depend on them. I think, and I know that the psalmist didn't understand physics, but I think he did understand some of the basics of God's creation, and that it is trustworthy. We can count on it. It makes sense. It's orderly. In the same way, I think he looked at God's law and says, it's true of God's law also. We can count on that. And if we follow God's law, just as we cooperate with the physical laws of nature, good things are going to happen, and they can be productive, and we can accomplish things by following them. If we try to violate one of the laws of nature, then bad things are going to happen. If we violate God's laws, which are good for us, made for us, because God loves us, bad things can happen. It's like a moral law that's written into the fabric of all of existence. Whether we came across it over time and become to understand it, or however it happened, given to Moses on the mountain, it just exists. It just is. Just like God just is, so are the laws of the created universe, and so are the laws of morality. God has created for us to live within. And if we'll follow those, we'll find our lives much more meaningful, much more fulfilled, and we'll find that a sense of hope and purpose and meaning in life that we would not experience otherwise. And we will find ourselves less often running into obstacles that cause us to stumble. And so the psalmist connected God's laws with God's goodness for us, to the fact that he prayed at the end, who can discern his errors? God, forgive my hidden faults. Keep me from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then will I be blameless, innocent of great transgression. And the clincher here, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. The guy that married me and Kendall, Sanford Brown, used to always say this. He would say, we are never more fully ourselves than when we are fully his. Did you hear that? We are never more fully ourselves than when we are fully his. I think Sanford was absolutely right. A lot of times we look at the law, we look at the commands, we look at loving God, and we look at loving others, and we don't get that part of it. Somehow we think that we're missing out on something, and so we kind of get outside of this thing that God wants us to stay within because it's for our own good. And so becoming the most full, people that we are, becoming who we really are, is intimately tied to our loving God and our loving other people. That's why it is so important. Now, why is community with people? Why is that so important? Well, first of all, the prophets preached it. They continued to expand on these laws, 613 from the original 10. By the time the prophets came around, this is the kind of thing that you were hearing toward the end of the Old Testament. Jeremiah 31:33 says, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. He's moving it from having this letter of the law, and he's saying, I want to put this in your heart. I want to put it in your mind, and so that the experience of your life is not bound to the law itself. It's tied to who you are at the deepest levels, and that person being who you are is living in communion with God and living in communion with other people. And that is the fullest expression of who we will ever become. Even if we fall short, that's the direction we need to be heading. Hosea says, God said to Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledging God rather than giving offerings. How about that? Now, our offering of ourselves and anything else that we can give may be an expression of our love for God. It may also be an expression of our love for people, because we can't do ministry without giving of ourselves, whether it's in our time and treasures or whatever it is. In Malachi, which I shared with you last time I spoke, he said, God has shown you what is good, what the Lord requires of you, and that is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Walk humbly with God, communion with God. Love mercy, act justly, community with other people. The second reason community with people is very important is because Jesus affirmed it. And I've already mentioned this, where he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, the entire law and all of the prophets hang on those two commandments. Jesus affirmed it. Why else is it important for us to live in community with people? James, Jesus' brother, restated it in a different way, and it's referred to as the royal law. And he said that if you fulfill the royal law, you are doing the right thing. He said the royal law is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. John, Jesus' favorite disciple, at least John thought he was, said, let's see, you guys who are like Bible scholars, y'all got that. All right. It's the end of the book of John if you want to go look it up. All right. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who has been born of God loves God and knows God. Whoever does not love others does not know God, because God is love. We can't say that we love other people or that we love God or know God if we don't also love other people, which means that it's important for us to live within the community with people. Paul defined it. Paul defined it as love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others, which is why I got off Facebook. No, it's not really. Sometimes I wasn't very nice, though. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes. It always perseveres. And he goes on to say that of all there is, that is the one thing that we have now in this life that will go forward into eternity with us. It's the only thing that's going to continue forever as far as our relationships go, is love. That's how important it is to love other people. And if you want a definition, that's 1 Corinthians 13. Write it down. Try to memorize parts of it if you can. I've tried to do it. I've got most of it down, at least bits and pieces. I can do it. Might not be in the right order, but I've got it in my head anyway. I had a seminary professor who said, if you want to know how you're doing in this department, just ask your wife or ask your husband. Am I more kind to you today than I was this time last year? Don't answer that, Kendall. So loving people, not only this is God's plan for us, but it also honors God. Loving people honors God. Well, how is that? It's because Paul says that we are ambassadors for Christ. It says that we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. We are ambassadors for Christ. As we love other people, then we bear witness to God. If we say we love God, we know God, but we don't act like it, then that doesn't honor God in the eyes of other people. And so by doing it, we bring glory and honor to God. We bring God recognition. We honor God when we live in proper relationship with other people through community. And so Romans 8:31 says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for us all, how will he not also with him freely give us all things? God is for us. The law is for us. The intent of the law, which is to love God and to love other people consistently, is good for us because God is for us. God is not overbearing, trying to cause us to live uncomfortable lives, making us do things that aren't good for us. He wants us to live in the boundaries and the types of relationships with God and with other people that will help us to experience at the deepest levels who we really are. Someone once said, it takes a village to raise a child. I think, you know what, it really doesn't take a village to raise a child. I think it does take a decent family. And that family, it takes a family that's trying to live in a relationship with God and with God's people. I think that really goes toward raising that child properly. But the truth is, a village is going to end up raising our kids. I mean, think about your own life, right? I mean, there's that part that was tied to our family, very important. But there's another part when mom and dad aren't around, or brother and sister aren't around, or maybe they were and we'd been better off if they weren't, that influence us, people, village of people, the people we hang out with, they influence us and we influence them, either for the good or for the bad. And so ultimately, a village does raise us, and it's the village of our own choosing. If we're kids, it's the village of our parents' choosing. As adults, it's the village of our own choosing. So I can't state this more emphatically than to simply say, choose your village wisely. Choose it wisely, because whether we realize it or not, the village that we live within, the community of people we choose to surround ourselves with, is either influencing us toward God and toward living in relation with the right relationship with other people, or it's having an adverse effect. So be wise. Whether we're looking at the Old Testament law, the Ten Commandments, or we're looking at how that's restated by Jesus or James, in both cases, the end goal is the same. It's God's plan for us. It's the way God has designed for us to live in relationship on this earth. First with God, then with other people. The Ten Commandments teach us to love and respect God, to love and respect people. This is God's plan for us. Jesus' summation of the Ten Commandments, love God and love others, teach us to love and respect God, to love and respect people. This is God's plan for us. This is not complicated. It's very simple. We might not be able to fill up a 1,000-page book explaining it, but it really is that simple. It ends up being ultimately simply about communion with God and community with other people. Throughout life, we come across pretty significant forks in the road, junctures in life, where we have to make very critical decisions. Three examples that kind of rise to the top for me are, what are you going to do with your life? Or what do I want to do with my life? What kind of a career do I want to do? What kind of a, because this is a vocation. This is something you're going to be doing a lot of hours of a lot of days, of a lot of weeks of the rest of your life. And so that's a really important, critical question. What am I going to do vocationally? Another one would be, who am I going to marry? That's pretty important too. I remember when I came to Christ, I'd been 10 years lost. And a lot of that was, I was just stoned all the time, quite honestly. And so 10 years of living in a fog, day and night. I mean, honestly, my brother found a bale of pot washed up on the beach. We had pot to smoke as much as we want, free. It tasted terrible, but man, it would get you high. And so we did. We smoked before school. We had smoking permits. It was for cigarettes, but if there were no teachers around, we would smoke pot at school. Yeah, we did. And we smoked pot after school. For 3 or 4 years, I stayed stoned all the time. Maybe even more years than that. I mean, literally, whether I was at work or school or it didn't matter. checking people out at the hotel, doing the audit, the night audit, taking classes, whatever. I don't know. I survived it, really. God's grace. Whew. Some of you probably, now you know. See, there you go, Mike. But then again, I could be worse off. And so I thank God that he spared me. And so when I came to Christ, I was still living in a fog. And I was far from becoming the person that I wanted to be. I could see myself as being someone different than who I was at that time. I intentionally chose to not get involved in any relationships with girls for, well, at least a year, probably 18 months, a couple of years, because I just did not want to get myself involved in a relationship. And this person that I was involved with was, if they became attracted to me, they were becoming attracted to someone who was not who I was further along and who I was going to be. I wanted to be further along than I was. That's how important it was for me to try to find the right person to marry. And thankfully, Kendall came along, and again, God had mercy on me, and Kendall said yes when I asked her to marry me. I don't know why he did that to her, but it's very nice to me. And so who we're going to marry is so, so important. And then there's another one, kids. What about kids? Are we going to have kids or are we not going to have kids? I didn't want to have kids for the longest time. I just didn't want them. I thought, this is no way. This is too much. Life is already tough enough, It's tough enough picking up after me and Kendall. Now I'm going to have to pick after me, Kendall, and babies. Okay, Kendall, I'm sorry. I'll stop picking at you. And so that's another really important decision. It wasn't until, lo and behold, God again showed mercy, and he did not give us any kids, even though we were not very good at using protection. Turns out there's a reason for that, which, is a medical thing. And I was at a Promise Keepers event, and something happened, and God broke through to me, and I just started crying. I started weeping, and deep down inside, I felt this impression. It said, I want kids because I want kids, not because Kendall wants kids. I want kids. I want to have children. And I went home and told Kendall. Of course, she was really happy. And that was when we found out that there's a reason why we weren't having any success, even though we weren't trying not to, if that makes sense. It didn't make sense, but you know what I'm talking about. And so another thing happened, amazing thing happened. We started taking the medical steps to do it artificially, right? And so this timing thing was really important. And Kendall came home one day and she said, Greg, it's all messed up. We're supposed to go in on this day, it's the 14th day, and blah, 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 and get all this thing rolling. And my cycle's all messed up. It's not going to work out. I'm going to be out of town, and I'm not going to be able to do it when it's supposed to be done. Yes. Y'all stay with me now. Just one more thing. Yes. And so, Kendall was in one of these doctor's offices a few days later, and she was talking to somebody there and telling them what's going on. It's like I missed my, cycle and everything, and we're planning on having it work out just right and have it artificial, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, why don't you just take a test? You might be pregnant. I didn't know she was doing all this stuff. I went to pick up some supplies for a memorial service that Rod and I were having on a Saturday. I think it was a Friday. Happened to see Kendall in Publix. I was leaving, and she was coming in, so we just, greeted one another and parted ways. She showed up at the memorial service later in the day with a balloon. It said, what did it say, Kendall? Happy Father's Day? It said, Happy Father's Day. I'm like, what? Because it was just like the weekend before Father's Day, I guess, wasn't it? Yeah, otherwise they wouldn't have balloons about Happy Father's Day. So, makes sense. See, I told you I'd smoked a bunch of stuff. And so, And so, yes, God did that. I mean, well, be careful. I think God did that. I really believe God did that. It sounds like something God would do, and the timing and everything was just so perfect. God waited until I was ready, and then surprised me in a way that just floored me. I still have the balloon. It was one of those plastic kind that you don't inflate. It's just like on a little stick or something. So I still have it. I'm proud of that thing. There's one more decision that we all have to face in life. And this is the most important decision that we will ever make. It's more important than what we're going to do. It's more important than who we're going to marry. It's more important than whether or not we have kids. The last week of Jesus' life, he was in Jerusalem. And he was arrested and taken to the governor of Judea, Pilate. Pontius Pilate. Pilate interviewed Jesus, realized that he was no threat to him, and said, I find no fault with this guy. So he just took him out to the crowds who were very unruly. They were making a fuss. He said, it's a custom that we can release a prisoner during your holy days. I've got two guys here. They're both what you would call insurrectionists. We've got this guy called Barabbas. Barabbas was a bad, bad man. Got this man called Jesus. I'm going to let one of them go. He said, which one shall I release? And they started shouting, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. I'm sure Pilate was just thinking, why? Why would they do this? He said, well, what do you want me to do with this man Jesus? And they shouted, crucify him. Pilate was faced with that question. What will I do with this man Jesus? He posed the same question to the crowd. What are you going to do with this man Jesus? And he asks every one of us, what are we going to do with this man Jesus? That is the most important. The answer to that question is the most important answer, the most important question you will ever receive, you'll ever have in your life. When Jesus was walking the earth and doing ministry, he attracted quite a large following. In fact, there were multitudes following at one point. People were just loving this Jesus guy. I mean, he was running around doing miracles and things, and he was getting on to the religious leaders. People were just loving it. And but then he started talking about following me is going to be problematic for you at times. It's going to be hard. And life is going to be challenging for you. And so the more he talked about the hard possibilities of what might happen by following him, more and more people began to start walking away. Until everyone had left except for Jesus' 12 disciples. At that point, Jesus turned to them and said, how about you guys? Will you also leave? And Peter answered and said, Lord, where else do we have to go? You're the only one who has the words of eternal life. We all face a crossroad or a fork in the road in our lives where we're confronted with this question. What are you going to do with this man Jesus? A few weeks ago, we were having a fishing trip. And Tim Padgett, who prayed for us this morning, Tim, that's a beautiful prayer, thank you, shared with us several years ago something that happened to him. He came to this fork in the road in his life. And he said, I never really felt like I lost my relationship with God, but I wasn't walking with God. And he said he just kept hearing this voice inside of him say, I miss my fellowship. I miss my communion with you. And this voice kept bugging him for probably years, a number of years, and he just couldn't get away from it. And he had to decide because it was at that time he's like, I've got to answer this. I've got to finally answer this. What am I going to do? He's calling me to say, choose. What you going to do? And Tim said at that point, he cashed it all in. He cashed it all in. He was like the guy that Jesus talked about who found a pearl of great value and sold everything that he had in order to get that one single pearl. That's what Tim said he did. He cashed it all in. He didn't hold anything back. What Tim is saying is that he reached the point of no return. There's no going back now. It's all, I'm going all in. I'm not half and half. I'm not anything like, I'm all in. And I'm done with it. This is it. I'm following Jesus. End of story. Isn't that right, Tim? We all face that same question. That same question is posed to us when we come to that juncture in the road. And what I want you to understand this morning, if you don't already get this, is that God's plan, which is following Jesus, is a good plan. It's a good plan. Don't feel like God is trying to steal something away from you, trying to keep you from doing things that you really want to do that God doesn't want you to do. Don't think that at all. It's not like that. God loves us, and he wants us to follow him because he wants us to be who he has created us to be in the most fullness that can happen to us. C.S. Lewis likened the Christian faith to this. He said so many times that we think of walking with Christ or being a Christian means, well, if I do this, then this good thing's going to happen to me. Or if I do this bad thing's going to happen to me. It's like a, if and then kind of a thing. And so we make our choices based on this fear or this promise of reward. Fear of punishment or promise of reward. And he's like, he didn't say this, but I'll say it. That's thinking like the Old Testament. All right? He said, C.S. Lewis said, that's not how it is. Jesus showed us a different way, and this is what it's about. Every choice that we make is causing us to become more like the person that we're following, one that is in harmony with God and is in harmony with other people, as much as that's possible, or one that is becoming more antagonistic toward God and toward other people. Every decision we make is changing us a little bit by little by little, into either one thing, the heaven creature, or the other thing, that hell creature. When Tim cashed in his chips, you might say, he did what we all should do. He basically said, that's it. Everything that I have is all in. All the chips that I have are on the table. I'm betting it all. I'm betting it all. Life is a gamble. Life is a gamble. Now, we can live this life. We can receive Christ. We can try to follow him as best we can with God's help. And we can live a life that has a positive impact in our world, in our relationships with other people, that leaves a legacy, that leaves a wake in our path, that is about the things that we sang about this morning, the things that are good and right and pure and just and lovely, that are praiseworthy. Stuff like being kind and gentle and patient and forgiving and bearing one another's burdens, all these great things. We can have lives that are like that, and we live our lives in faith, believing that there's something on the other side when we pass on, which is heaven and eternity with Jesus Christ, with God, and with our friends and family. And we can do that, and then we can shut our eyes for the last time, and that's it. That's it. There's nothing else. But if we were to be able to reflect back and we were to be able to say, you know what, I'm still glad I did it. I'm still glad because I know my life meant something. And I think that is honoring to God as best I can understand God and God's goodness. Or we could close our eyes for the last time and we could see the face of Jesus. And he would say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into your rest. And we can walk into this place where there's no more tears or sorrow, no more mourning, where there's no more competition, antagonism, there's no more hate and lust. There's just joy and peace and love. And we can look back and say, boy, I sure am glad I took the gamble and I cashed it all in on that. Either way, we're a winner, aren't we? So what's the risk? What is the risk? Why would we not do this? It's the most important decision we will ever make in our lives. I beg you, if you haven't done it, think about it. Give it all. Give it all to Jesus. Follow him, and you will not regret it. Because no matter what waits for us on the other side, we will have made the right choice. And we will live this life by faith that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. That same Spirit that raised him from the dead will also raise us back to life in that day. And we'll spend eternity with God. C.S. Lewis said, Christianity, if false, is of no importance. But if it's true, it is of infinite importance. The only thing it can't be is moderately important. This is the most important decision we'll ever make in our lives. What will we do with this man Jesus?